Hello everyone, I am Dr. Susankfa Gogoi. Welcome you all to your favorite channel, e-Politica. Everything that you wanted to know on political science. I'm here today with another module on your channel, e-Politica, titled as Freedom, Liberty, Meaning and Types. So in this current module, it is prepared for the CBCS course for undergraduates in political science honors. Let us begin. The objectives of today's module is to learn about the meaning of freedom, to understand different perspectives on freedom, to analyze the use of freedom as liberty, to examine the different types of freedom. So with these objectives in mind, we will be discussing about freedom at length. Now, before we talk about some of the important meaning and perspectives on freedom, it is very important for us to understand some of the basic questions that comes in our mind whenever we talk about the concept of freedom. These questions you can see in my PPT slide. You can see it is to understand: does men are born free? If yes, do all men enjoy equal freedom? Why freedom is important for individual? Is there any connection between freedom with liberty? Is freedom is natural possession of men, or it is given by some? When I say some, it basically means state or state-like agencies. To answer these questions, we can draw some, analogy on the concept of freedom. Now, here I would like to first focus on what it has been said by Rousseau. J. Rousseau, who was also known as a famous social contextualist, he once said that man is born free, but everywhere is in chains. What does it mean? It means that as an individual, it is a natural right of man to be free. But because man lives in a society, he is always in connection with others. So therefore, an individual's freedom is not considered to be completely of his or her own. Rather, it depends on the collaborative or wholesome freedoms of recognition from others. So therefore, freedom has something to do with others as well. When we talk about the concept of freedom, to answer the question that we have asked, there is an undeniable connection between the concept of freedom with rights. Now, many a time we consider freedom as rights. For example, we can talk about one of the famous saying said by none other than one of the famous Indian freedom fighters, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who said that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. Now, when Bal Gangadhar Tilak said that Swaraj is my birthright, what does it mean? It means that freedom as a concept is something to do with individual's right. It is a right which a man earned during the time of his birth, and he should have it. So therefore, the concept of freedom has a connection with the possibility of rights. Then, whenever we talk about the concept of freedom, like that we have asked in the last question that we have posed at the beginning of this lecture, there is something to do connection. There is a connection between the state with the freedom of an individual. Many times in a modern nation state, we saw that an individual's or citizen's freedom, it is not a natural phenomenon. Rather, it is a political recognition given by the state. Therefore, without having consent or without having the recognition from the state, an individual cannot have access to freedom at chance. For example, whenever we talk about Indian people, in India, people of India has been given lots of freedom in the constitution itself. But that freedom can also be controlled by certain provisions which is also mentioned in the constitution. For example, you can talk about the emergency powers of the president. So therefore, it is mainly to be understood that many a time, not only India and across the globe, it can be seen that individual's freedom is to be given or it is to be recognized by the state itself. Now, let us talk about the meaning of freedom. Whenever you talk about different kinds of political concepts, whether it is freedom, you talk about justice, you talk about equality, all these concepts are always considered to be essentially contested. That when I say that these concepts are essentially contested, what does it mean? It means that there has been different perspectives in understanding the meaning of concepts related to political theory. Freedom is also not exception. Whenever we talk about the concept of freedom, there lies different orientations. There lies different perspectives in understanding the concept of freedom. Now let us talk about very quickly what are the different perspectives on freedom. The first perspective that has been developed by the classical liberals. Now, what are the classical liberals talks about freedom? According to classical liberals, freedom is understood as a condition where there is no absence of, there is no restraints, there is no constraints about an individual's enjoyment of freedom. So therefore, it can be understood that freedom is considered to be absence of restraints. What does it mean? It means that while enjoying a freedom, an individual or group of individual must not be under pressure of any kind of organization. There shall not be any norms, there shall not be any restrictions while enjoying the individual's freedom. So this is what the classical liberals talks about, the concept of freedom. Now, when you talk about the positive liberals have provided a different orientation in understanding the concept of freedom. According to them, for positive liberals, freedom is viewed as a conditions. What kind of condition? A condition created by the state which lead to the personal development and human fulfillment. So positive liberal, they trusted the state as a mechanism to ensure a situation of freedom where an individual can best use of his or her capacities, qualities, so that he or she can develop her personal development and can find a way for getting a good livelihood in future. A choice, freedom of choice to be recognized by the state. So this is what the positive liberals has to talk about, the concept of freedom. Whereas when it comes to socialists had provided us another dimensions on freedom. For socialists, they think that freedom is in the hands of the state. And they understood freedom as a system, as an environment which is to be ensured by the state. How? By providing welfare-state program to the people, by adopting or managing the economy. The state can assure freedom to the people. So this is the socialist interpretation of freedom. Then come the feminist interpretation of freedom. Feminists had a different orientation while understanding freedom. For them, freedom means freedom of women from subjugation and oppression caused by patriarchy. So the patriarchy as an institution, the kind of domination, the kind of oppression, the kind of control that has been put over the women while enjoying their rights, if there is an absence of that kind of oppression and repression and control from the patriarchal institution, that is what understood to be freedom according to feminist perspective. Now you can see there are two other perspectives of freedom also. Marxists had a different perspectives in understanding the concept of freedom. Marxists are very much critical about the civil and political liberties. They view that these kind of liberties like civil or political liberties, these are the ideal developed by the capitalist societies. And these are created only to benefit a particular section of the society. So therefore, they say that this kind of freedom, which has been given by a capitalist society, political liberty or civil liberty, it is not uniform for everyone. Therefore, Marxists please that there must be a freedom which can be beneficial for everyone. There should be a freedom for everyone, not for a particular class. So this is what the Marxist interpretation of freedom. Then come the anarchists. Anarchists regard freedom as an absolute value. They feel that if the freedom is there, then automatically there is a question in front of the political authority. So they do not want to provide freedom to the people, because if the people have the freedom, they might question the legitimacy of the political authority, or they can go against the state. Therefore, the anarchists have a very negative outlook regarding the concept of freedom. Now, let us have some very important definitions given by some important personalities. You can see in my slide where I will read them. The first definition that I have taken from the Concise Oxford Dictionary, I quote, freedom as personal liberty, civil liberty, and liberty of action. So according to Concise Oxford Dictionary, freedom is understood to be a concept which is a connection with the personal liberty, civil liberty, and liberty of action. If there is this kind of liberty has been ensured, then there is freedom according to the Concise Oxford Dictionary. Now, there is another definition given by political philosopher Professor T.S. Green. He said that, I quote, freedom is the positive power or capacity of doing or enjoying something worth doing or enjoying, and that too something we do or enjoy with others. So Green had provided us an wholesome idea about the concept of freedom. He said that freedom is firstly, it is a positive power. It is a positive power. It is a positive capacity of individual. Of what kind of positive capacity? The capacity to do something which a person really wanted to do, or something which is really important to doing. So that's why freedom is considered to be a positive capacity of an individual to have access to his own choices. And it also means that while enjoying the access to freedom by an individual, he should also do it along with others. So he has provided us an individualistic as well as a holistic perspectives on freedom. Then come another important definition given by Harold Lasky. I quote, "Freedom is the eager maintenance of that atmosphere in which men have the opportunity to be their best selves." Now, if you look at into this definition, what it has been said by Lasky, it could be understood that Lasky said that when you talk about the concept of freedom, it basically talking about a maintenance of an atmosphere where the individual can have used the best opportunities for the best possible benefits for themselves. So therefore, for him, freedom is considered to be an opportunity where an individual can use them for their own personal gain or personal benefits. Then come another definition given by Spencer. Spencer said that every man is free to do that which he wills, provided he infringes not the equal freedom of any other man. Therefore, Spencer is of the opinion that an individual freedom is not entirely his or her alone. Many a time, an individual freedom is also related with others. What does it mean? It means that while enjoying the freedom of him or herself, a person must also be careful about the freedom of others. It means that when we want to enjoy our freedom, we must also take care of the freedom of others. We should not infringe into the equal rights of freedom enjoyed by others. So these are some of the basic definition that gives us a clear definition about what do we mean by freedom. Now we would like to talk about one important aspect of freedom, that is to understand the concept of freedom as liberty. Now many a time it is seen that the idea of freedom is considered to be synonym to the concept of liberty. So we use the terminology called freedom and liberty many a time as interchangeably. Now the question is whether we can really use the terminologies interchangeably. That is a question of debate that we would like to introduce now. For that, we need to understand the etymological meaning of the terminology called liberty. The word liberty, as you can see in the screen, it derived from a Latin word called liber, which means to be free. It means that freedom is said to exist when external constraints on individual are absent. So it means that when there is no control over individual from any external forces, that is the conditions of liberty. So in that sense, freedom can also be understood as liberty, because freedom also means as absence of freedom. But if we say that, there would be a very one-sided explanation of what exactly freedom stands for. Now freedom has another interpretation of it. Many a time, freedom also ensures the creation of conditions by which personality of individuals can be developed. Because etymologically, the terminology freedom, it derived from an English word called freedom, which means, as you can see in the screen, state of free will, character, or deliverance. So it means that many a time the idea of freedom is not only to not having any kind of restraint from external forces, but also to create an environment of positive upliftment of personality of an individual. So that can also be understood to be the concept of freedom. Now, there are broadly two perspectives in prescribing the freedom as liberty. The first perspective, it says that it advocates that both the concept of freedom and liberty can be used synonymously. So basically, the liberals, they are of the opinion that there is no degree of difference between the concept of freedom and liberty. They understood both the concept as same. For example, we can here talk about what Isaiah Berlin has talked about. Berlin says that the terminological liberty and freedom, it means the same. So many a time he does not find any kind of difference between the terminological freedom and liberty and its orientations. However, there is another school of thought which advocates that there exists a difference between liberty and freedom. This school of thought is propagated fundamentally by philosophers belonging to idealism and Marxism. So idealists and Marxists, they are of the opinion that there is a degree of difference between the application of these two words. Let us take examples how they have discussing about the fundamental difference between the concept of liberty and freedom. Here, the first, the example that we want to draw in this connection is by Maurice Cranston. So Maurice Cranston, in the year 1967, he wrote a book called Liberalism. In that book, he said that freedom is used for a wider idea. What does he say? He said that the freedom is a wider idea, which is more philosophical in outlook. When it comes to the term liberty, it indicates a particular aspect of freedom. Now, if you can try to understand what Maurice Cranston has to talk about in understanding the relationship between freedom and liberty, he said that freedom is a wider concept, whereas liberty is just a branch of freedom. So freedom as a philosophical concept, the boundary, the scope is very broad. When it comes to the concept of liberty, it is a very specific branch of freedom. The second definition that we would like to take here is given by H.F. Pitkin. So H.F. Pitkin had wrote an article called Are Freedom and Liberty Twins in the year 1988. So in that article, Pitkin said that liberty implies protection from state interference. What does it say? He says that liberty, it implies protection from the state interference, while freedom implies active involvement in politics. So here also, while discussing about the freedom and liberty, he provides us two different orientations regarding the applicability of the concepts of freedom and liberty. For him, liberty is an idea where there is no state interference, whereas freedom basically means that people have the choice to participate in the political activities actively. So there is one state aloofness, another way he is talking about engaging in the state activities. So these make the debate between liberty and freedom look very interesting. So therefore, although many a time we try to understand liberty and freedom as same, but there exists a degree of difference between understanding the concept, their context and applicability. So there is a degree of difference between these two terminologies. Now let us very quickly talk about different types of freedom and liberty. Broadly, freedom and liberty can be classified into three broad categories of liberty, as you can see. The first one is called natural liberty. The second one is called social and civil liberty. And the third one is called moral liberty. Now, when you talk about the natural liberty, what does it mean? Natural liberty or natural freedom basically mean to that condition where an individual enjoys those liberties, those freedom which they have enjoyed when they are in a state of nature. Here we can draw analogy from three prominent social contextualists: Rousseau, Hobbes, and Locke. So Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, they were the three prominent social contextualists who talks about the social contract. So being as a social contextualist, although they have provided three different orientations how the social contract was being made, but at one point, three of them agreed was that before coming to the political society, man stays in a state of nature. So in that state of nature, the kind of rights, the kind of liberty, the freedom that has been enjoyed by an individual has been considered to be the natural liberty. This is one dimension of understanding natural liberty. Secondly, when you talk about the idea of natural liberty, it also means that as an individual, when a person born, the natural phenomenon, the natural right that he enjoyed, being as an individual, that degree of liberties are also considered to be natural liberty. For example, the liberty of life, the right to life, the right to choice of own religions. These kind of liberties are considered to be natural liberty because these are naturally comes to an individual by virtue of his birth. Then come the second categories of liberty, that is called as social and civil liberty. This social and civil liberty can be categorically divided into another four branches of liberty. These are called as personal liberty, political liberty, economic liberty, and national liberty. Now you must be wondering, why do we call these personal, political, economic, and national liberty as social and civil liberty? Now, when you talk about a social civil liberty, it basically means those liberties which are associated with an individual being as a citizen of a nation. So, as a citizen of a nation, the kind of liberty that has been enjoyed by an individual is considered to be the social and civil liberty. To every single individual who lives in a society, every single individual who stays in a state, so by virtue of his membership to the society, by virtue of his membership to the state, automatically he gains certain degree of liberties. And these certain degree of liberties are considered to be the social and civil liberties. Now there are four categories of social and civil liberties, I have said. These are personal liberty, political liberty, economic liberty, and national liberty. Now what does this personal, political, economic, and national liberty mean? Let me explain a bit. By personal liberty, we are basically understanding those liberties as personal liberty, where an individual get the access to his choices for the best use of his own capacities and capabilities. It is related to individual. Now every single individual has got their own qualities, they have got their own calibers. Now, if they do not have the access to freedom, they would definitely cannot enjoy or cannot enhance their personality. They cannot use best use of their capacities, capabilities. That is what we call as personal liberty. Now, this personal liberty is to be given or recognized by the state by virtue of its citizenship towards in a particular nation. Then come the political liberty. Now, when you talk about the political liberty, we are basically talking about that liberty where the people get an opportunity to participate in the political realm freely. By political liberty, we are talking about those liberties which are enjoyed by an individual being as a citizen of a country. What kind of political liberty we are talking about? For example, right to vote, right to participation in political activities, giving feedback to the government, creating public opinion, participating in political activities via political organizations, political party, pressure groups, organizing protests against the government, creating support to the government, abiding by the rules and regulation provided by the government. These kind of things are considered to be the political liberty. So by political liberty, we are talking about the liberty by which an individual enjoyed to participate in the political activity without having any kind of constraints. Then come the economic liberty. By economic liberty, many a time we got confused that by economic liberty we are talking about assured employment. But when it comes to economic liberty, it does not talk about assured economic employment or economic livelihood. It basically means that when you talk about the economic liberty, we have to assure an environment where the people can equally participate, equally have the access of freedom to participate in the economic activities of the country. That means the state must ensure the basic amenities to the public. So this kind of economic liberty must be also enjoyed. For example, one person want to pursue a particular career. One person really want to pursue a particular skill based on his own skill. So that economic environment or economic freedom must be assured by a country. That is what we understood as economic liberty. So by economic liberty, we are not talking about assured employment. By economic liberty, we are talking about that environment where an individual can have access to equal opportunity for economic avenues. For example, the government comes up different kinds of policies. The person must have that freedom to get into that economic policy, to get the benefits of the government policies for economic development of the people. So this is what economic liberty is all about. Then come the national liberty. Now, when you talk about the idea of national liberty, it has a different orientation. By national liberty, we are basically talking about a liberty where the nation as a whole, the people as a community, must be free from any kind of foreign control, must be free from any kind of external aggression by any superior forces. So as a nation, when a country enjoys that freedom of self-autonomy, self-determination, outside the control of others over their own sovereignty, that liberty is considered to be the national liberty. Then comes the last liberty, that is called as moral liberty. By moral liberty, we are basically talking about liberty as a value. Now, when you say that liberty is a value, what does it imply? It implies, as a moral concept, freedom is also have to do with what is good for a human being, what is bad for a human being. By moral liberty, it basically means that a freedom of one is not only a right, it is not only a possession, but it is also a responsibility toward others. So while enjoying the liberty, we must also take care of others' equal freedom. We must take care of others' equal liberty. So this is what moral liberty is. That morally, liberty basically means to provide equality, establishment of egalitarian society, where everyone would get equal potentiality for enjoyment of or entitlement of freedom. So this is what we understood as moral liberty. So these are broadly the types of freedom and liberty. So today's module was completed. Now these are some of the reading lists that you can look at for further understanding of the concept of freedom and liberty. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe to this channel for upcoming modules on other aspects of political science. And if you have anything to say, please write it in the comment box. I know that because of the time constraint, I could not talk about the things at length. But if you really want me to talk about these issues more, please write back to me in my email, that is susengfa@nlc.ac.in. Thank you for watching your favorite channel, e-Politica. I am Dr. Susengfa Gogoi signing off now. See you again in the next model. Thank you very much.